सदफ,
हाँ जी सर।
आज के एपिसोड में रिसर्च नहीं करनी पड़ेगी ज्यादा,
बस इतने बड़े आदमी हो गए हो, काम चोरी चालू।
अरे खुद ही आज हम हमारी रिसर्च की सोर्स को ले आए पॉडकास्ट पर।
क्या बात करो, ये बढ़िया काम किया गुरु। कौन है?
अ, आप जैसे आपको पता नहीं है। So today we have the absolute honor of having Vikram Doctor on the show. Vikram is not a doctor, but you might as well give him an honorary degree in food analysis.
Yeah, but Archit, even before we go to that path and get into discussing with Vikram, याद है वो दिन जब आसमान में सूरज और चांद दोनों के दीदार एक साथ हो रहे थे, सर्द हवाएं चल रही थी और हम एक सड़े से कैफे साकेत में बैठे हुए थे, वहां पर कॉफी चाय कुछ तो पी रहे थे और अचानक से ये जिक्र छिड़ा कि भाई पॉडकास्ट में किसको सुनते हो? फूड पॉडकास्ट। एंड बोथ ऑफ अस यूनानिमसली सेड विक्रम डॉक्टर, और तो कोई है नहीं। एंड दैट, my friend and everybody who's listening, and Vikram, of course, you as well, that gave birth to Naan Curry podcast. We are like, we are going to have Vikram Doctor is there, and then we will be the next Vikram Doctor. But we can't be Vikram Doctor because there's only one Vikram Doctor.
No, that's really kind of you guys. But the truth is, my podcast was done like now about 5 years back at a time when podcasting was just starting off. And most people didn't listen to podcasts. And I think what's great is now, podcasting has grown to the point, thanks to podcasts like yours, where there is actually a real audience for podcasts. So it's amazing that what we started with Audiomatic way back has become the sort of space that it is now. And full credit to like podcasters like you guys.
Yeah. And the brilliant thing about your podcast, the Real Food Podcast, is that you can actually hear it even in say 2025. It will still make sense because there's nothing contemporary about it. So I quite like that. It's a timeless piece of content.
Yeah. And I think we still clearly what Archita said, we still listen to often when we're researching, we're still researching basis a lot of listen to Vikram podcast podcast or and let me tell you, I am not going to be ashamed, मैंने तो ET के सब्सक्रिप्शन भी इसीलिए रखा है.
Thank you. That will help with my editor.
और किसी के लिए मैं I don't read ET for anything else but reading your thing.
Thank
you.
So
everybody already know Vikram Doctor is a legendary columnist. He writes and talks about food and everything around it. He, as Archit mentioned, Real Food Podcast, and of course, I think you also created Naan Curry podcast. So welcome Vikram.
Thank you
to Naan Curry podcast.
And also Sadaf, today we scored a half century. This is our 50th episode.
Oh wow, that's so cool. I think, and that, you see, you're beating me already because I think we only made it up to about 42 podcasts. So like this has already taken you guys beyond what we did.
Yay, almost like a year.
Yeah.
हम लोग सब हैप्पी डांस करेंगे थोड़ा देर के लिए, मतलब पॉडकास्ट के बाद अपने घरों में.
It's appropriate that we have Vikram on the show for us.
That is true.
To join us for our 50th episode. Anyway, Vikram, we want to start off, before we get into the topic of the show, we want to start about your life first. So let's go back a bit.
That's terribly boring. I mean, like, journalists never talk about their lives. I mean, I'm just a journalist. I write on food. The end of the story. So let's get on to the podcast.
I mean, you're stuck with us. We actually called you to know more about you, and we load you into with an interesting topic. So you're stuck with us. So I'm just curious, if you go back to your childhood, is there anything that influenced your professional interests in food as an adult? Do you spot any behaviors, occurrences, environmental factors that made?
I think one thing that helped was that I come from two communities. My father is Gujarati, my mother is from Kerala. So already in that sort of family, you have multiple influences. You have clashes, people fighting over like their way of cooking food, things like that. I mean, my father was typically Gujarati. Basically, he felt like there shouldn't be any other vegetable other than potatoes. Whereas my mother's family, cooked a far wider range of potatoes as well as fish and things like that. So there was always a certain tension over food, which made me aware that, food, these sort of food issues really matter to people. Food is not just what we eat, it's what we bring to it in terms of our histories, our emotions, our past, all sorts of things. And also growing up in Bombay in an apartment block meant that you were automatically linked, exposed to all kinds of foods. I was exposed to the South Indian auntie above me. I was exposed to the Parsis who lived above, two floors above. Kids at that time, went in and out of each other's houses, and automatically there was this sort of cross exposure, which I'm sure guys like you also had, right, growing up.
Yeah. Not maybe like the South Indian and then the Parsi uncle and all the people. I think Delhi in that department is little piche, because when you live in Bombay, you have various kinds of community. Delhi is limited to mostly north.
Yeah, but what's interesting is there are different areas, like army kids, for instance, grew up with that. Army kids grow up with that sort of cross-pollination. Kids who grew up with parents in the railways, again, have this sort of thing. I keep coming across people who've simply, because of their childhoods, have had this amazing exposure to different kinds of foods and cultures.
Yeah,
absolutely. I opened up in terms of knowing more about food when I went to college in Mumbai. I'm originally from Delhi, and I stayed in a Gujarati area. I went to Narsi Monji.
Oh my God, that must have been like trauma for you.
Initially, yes. But then I became a bit open to trying out a lot of new things. I still don't like vada pav though. And of course, in college, you have people from all over the country. So talking to them, talking about their culture, food culture, really opened up things for me.
I mean, just outside, that whole Narsi Monji and all those colleges over there's an amazing range of street food guys, right? And you would have had so much exposure to all the creativity of Bombay street food, because I honestly think that the line of street food stalls outside that all those colleges in Juhu is one of the sort of great like informal cow gullies of Bombay.
Yeah, and coming from Delhi, I only knew like 3-4 kinds of dosas. If you be in Delhi, typically go to Sagar, Navedyam, and we knew masala dosa, uttapam. If you want to be creative, then Mysore masala dosa, and then you go to this cow gully.
Spring dosas.
Yeah, you'll find spring dosas, zini dosas, Shezwan dosas. There's hundreds of dosas. So it's just something else.
So, I mean, Delhi has a few of these things now, which is 99 dosas.
Actually, Delhi's creativity has come in momos. Delhi has pioneered tandoori momos, which is like, in a class by itself.
Yeah, I was about to say that. So before this, I used to live in Malviya Nagar, and close to my house, there was a really small shack kind of a shop they opened up, and literally there are only 2 people can stand in the shop kind of place. And there they were doing 99 kinds of momo.
Yeah.
And there was, of course, tandoori, but there was Afghani, there was chettinad, and there was, I don't know what not. They just stuff things in and then bake it, grill it, or just steam it, and then becomes. And also because when you're doing it, bake, grill, and steam and fry. So there are 4 categories in itself. And then all these fancy stuffing. It got shut eventually, like within like 1 or 1.5 years.
It's like an algorithm. You add, like you decide how do you want to cook it, and then you decide what kind of sauce goes into it, and then you decide what kind of chutney you have it with. So there's so many variations.
That's what the chefs do.
Street food is fascinating because of this constant pressure for creativity to get new people, new things, and it's not all expensive. I mean, like one of the most amazing types of street food which I've come across in Bombay has been Chinese bale. Archit, did you ever try Chinese bale?
I have had Chinese bale. Yeah.
Chinese bale is actually fascinating. I mean, for those viewers who have been unlucky enough not to be exposed to Chinese bale, actually Chinese bale is a street food salad. That's what it is. It involves cabbage, which is actually fascinating to me because I think Indians cook cabbage in wonderful ways, but nobody ever talks about cabbage. You will never find cabbage in a restaurant. It's a very home sort of thing, and I actually think Indians cook cabbage probably better than most cultures in the world. But we never celebrate our cabbage dishes. Whereas Chinese bale is basically strips of cabbage, stir fried with a little bit of Shezwan, so-called Shezwan sauce, and then it has bale. It has sort of what would you call the kurkure thrown over it. And that is it. It's a kurkure cabbage salad. It is amazing.
I'm curious because you mentioned you've lived in Bombay since a while, since forever. So 2 things. First, of course, what do you think? these kind of innovation, like where the idea germinates that, oh, let's try this. And second is also such kind of food. How do you see that in a social space, like a class divide wise?
I think that basically, street food is pure competition. You're always competing against somebody next door, and because it's cheap. I mean, street food has to do multiple things. Okay, we have this sort of glamorized idea of street food as something where we can go and indulge in, but we have to keep in mind that street food is actually basic food for lots of people. Who live in cities, and there is a whole range of street food which is like that. You can, while you get all the fancy grilled and deep fried street food, there's also dal chawal. There are all these in aunties who come to Bombay with these big steel dabbas of the dal chawal, and will give you like a full meal, one plate. But at the same time, I mean, street food is one of the little joys that people have. So it doesn't cost very much, and if you are, it's something you can indulge in, whether you're a penniless student or a penniless worker, or even if you're a rich person who just wants to slum it now and then. So, but there's always this push to do something new, and I think the student thing is interesting because some of the other places where I think a really interesting street food culture has emerged has actually not been in big cities like. It's no longer big cities like Bombay. It's actually cities like Kota and Indore, where you have this whole culture of these what do you call it, the tuitions. I mean the cramming schools. All these small towns which have become like centers for people to go and study for their IAS and IIM and IIT exams. Have all these young people who are sitting there bored, nothing else to do but study and eat, and street food. So I actually think the really interesting street food is coming now from places like Kota and Indore.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I remember, Archit, if you also, we did an episode with Kunal Vijayakar, and I was asking him the same, not the same. I was asking him that how to define street food, because you've been exploring street food since a while, and what you mentioned, right? Street food is not just fried food, but also chawal dal. And he said the same thing. He said anything which is on the street is street food. Absolutely. You can't define that. Acha, ye fast food hai, ye deep fried hai, to he street food कहलाएगा. Otherwise, नहीं कहलाएगा.
Yeah.
Nice.
One thing you mentioned, Sadaf, about class divide. So this was a shock for me when I went from Delhi to Bombay. In Delhi, typically street food, like roadside golgappa stalls, chaat stalls, were not frequented by the uber rich. But when I went to Bombay, I observed that in the same Mithi Bai vada pav stall, you could see students coming in, and in the evening, you'd see expensive BMWs parked outside for people to try those vada pav. So that's a slight difference I noticed in Delhi and Bombay food culture.
I think Delhi historically had a different sort of attitude towards street food. I mean, people like Madhur Jafri write about it.
Yeah.
Like for instance, because people lived in these large houses with multiple families, every now and then you would call a chaatwala from Old Delhi to come and make street food in your house for the whole family. So there was a slightly different attitude towards street food. You wouldn't go to the street; you would get the street to come to you, which is somehow very Delhi.
Yeah, I remember I was having discussions with somebody from Old Delhi, and he's little aged, and he was saying the same thing. He's like, "हम तो बाहर जाते ही थे. We were rich enough. We called all these pani puri guys to come over and make chaat for the whole family."
Right.
So yeah, it's a very, very Delhi thing. So one thing that Archit mentioned earlier was the algorithm. Not an algorithm, but similar to that, which is that you also started as a restaurant reviewer, saying and I think back in days, restaurant reviews actually meant, or food reviews actually meant really good food reviews, unlike nowadays, which is everything is good. But then you evolved to this very nuanced, analytical, and investigative food writing, a food journalist. It's like there's a criminal crime journalist, whatever that's called. You're in that where you're doing food history, but from a very different kind of angle. So how does that happen? Because for somebody like me who also love researching new things, so one of course is that to read you, but what's the beyond thing? How do you get into that sort of space where you're finding not just reviews, but also beyond that?
See, Sadaf, I got very bored with restaurant reviewing very fast. Partly, and partly that's because of Bombay, because honestly, I don't think Bombay has really interesting restaurants. I mean, this is heresy. I realize this, but the truth is that the really crazy rents that anybody has to pay in Bombay sort of preclude the creation of really interesting restaurants. So that's one problem. So you were just dealing with the same kinds of pretty boring restaurants. But after that, I also got bored because I felt bad to some extent. I mean, going to a bad restaurant, even a bad. Sadaf, you've been a chef. Even a bad restaurant has a lot of effort going into it. There are people.
Yeah.
There are people involved, and it's. I just felt like who am I to come here and say like crappy things about a place that does need to have crappy things to say about it. I couldn't go there in all honesty and say something something good. So that was one, and at the same time, I also found that restaurants were a really interesting. The food was a really interesting way to start conversations with people.
Yeah.
Most people are always happy to talk about food in one way or the other. It's also a really interesting way to talk about food with people who are actually not used to talking. So, for instance, women, working class people, all the people that who are marginalized in our normal discourse. But food is one thing that brings everybody together. So I found that talking about food and writing about food was a really interesting way to bring together all these, people, voices, aspects of society that were just not getting covered in other places.
Yeah. So when you started it, and this is really interesting, this would be interesting because when you started doing the background stories, everything about food beyond food review, how many people were there? Because now there are a lot of people, everybody's interested, but how many people were there like-minded, where you can go and bounce off your ideas saying, hey, how true is this?
But so that's the thing is, there have always been people writing about food. It's just that they've not always been, looked at as food writers.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, there were always anthropologists like R.S. Khare who was writing about food in Indian society. There was a whole range of agricultural scientists, who were writing about food in very technical terms in terms of agriculture. But I found that if you want to research something like, say, potatoes, which you just did a podcast about a few weeks back, you should just actually call the people at the Central Institute for Research on Potatoes and talk to them and get fascinating insights. So, there were people who were writing about travel, but actually talking about food. So actually there was a lot of food writing about food in many different ways. Many novelists actually deal with food. I don't know if you remember with Midnight's Children. Midnight's Children actually ends in a pickle factory. In fact, it's odd that all three Indian books that have won Booker prizes have all involved food. I mean, Midnight's Children ends in a pickle factory. The God of Small Things is also largely set in a pickle factory, and The White Tiger is about a halwai. I mean, so to me, that's an interesting example of how food is instinctively. All these novelists who wouldn't consider themselves as food writers understood that food is a way to illuminate different aspects of Indian society.
Absolutely. And Midnight's Children actually gives us a good segue into our next topic, or into the meat of this podcast. So let's go back to 1947.
Right.
India attained independence on the back of this great Bengal famine, which killed nearly 3 million plus people.
Right.
And as you write, Nehru made a very rash statement in 1949 saying that we shall live on the food we produce after 2 years or die in the attempt. So,
right.
Vikram, paint us a picture of the kind of food-related challenges in front of the Indian government at that point of time in 1947.
Right. So, I'm really grateful to you guys to accept my suggestion that we could talk in this podcast. We could talk about food and hunger, because typically this is not a conversation that food writers have. I mean, when you talk about food, you want to celebrate the joys of food, the abundance of food, the varieties of food, and you don't want to actually talk about hunger, which has always been a reality of life in India, and still is a reality of life in India. And even I feel a bit awkward talking about it. It sounds a bit preachy. At some point you start sounding preachy and telling people you do this, do that, etc. It's actually something that people like you, Archit, in your wearing your hat as a public policy specialist, would do, talking about hunger indexes and malnutrition and issues like that. But I have more recently started to realize that this is a conversation that is too important, with apologies to be left to public policy people. It's a conversation that has to involve a much wider range of society. The fact that just in these last few weeks we've had a whole new data coming about how low India rates on the global hunger index, about the effects of malnutrition, especially on Indian women. And this is like shocking. We are about to celebrate 75 years of independence, and hunger is still an issue in different ways, just as it was at the time of independence. So I've been feeling for a long time that this conversation about hunger has to become part of some way, and I'm still feeling a way. As I said, talking about hunger doesn't mean you can't talk about the food served in a 5-star hotel or about street food or something like that. I mean, all these are valid forms of talking about food. So in a sense, it's a challenge that I'm also trying to figure out, like, how do you bring in a conversation about hunger in a credible way, in a way that will resonate with people? And actually, the one thing I think that really helped crystallize this was actually COVID and the lockdown. Where were you two guys when the first really hard lockdown happened?
Home with family.
No, yeah. Where? In Delhi or in
Delhi?
In Gurgaon.
In Gurgaon. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was here in Goa, where I am at the moment, and the first lockdown was really eye-opening. I mean, typically, people think of Goa as a place of abundance. It's one of India's relatively richer states. People come here to party. People associate Goa with good food. But in that first lockdown, Goa got a sudden, sharp realization about how precarious our food systems are. Because Goa now, partly because it's a state where tourism dictates everything, has started growing less and less of its own food. In that first lockdown, when state borders were closed, suddenly we realized that all the vegetables in Goa come from Karnataka, all our grains come from Maharashtra, even fish, which was typically, which you would expect to be caught in Goa, was increasingly coming from trawlers, which land in other states. Some of our fish even comes from the east coast of India. And suddenly Goan suddenly realized, it was a wake-up call, that our food systems are much more precarious than you realize. At the same time, we also became aware that there were all these poor people in Goa who were in a really bad position. I mean, people like me didn't, it's a few problems, or not major problems. Whereas Goa has a construction boom, and there were all these construction sites where workers were virtually locked in by their contractors and with a bag of rice, and we're coming very close to starvation. Goa has a lot of older people. We don't talk about this, but one of the results of the sort of huge diaspora of Goans who have moved out of India is that a lot of older people have been left here and left to fend for themselves. So even I live in Asagaon in North Goa, which is a fairly affluent area, but even here there were little old homes where there were little old people who were completely blindsided by the lockdown and were coming very close to starvation. I mean, what happened in that thing is it was again instructive. A lot of Goans got together, a lot of long-term residents got together and tried to find ways to help. So for instance, one of the biggest landowners in the neighborhood I own is a lady who still has farms in interior Goa. And she had a lot of the 2 or 3 basic things that are still grown in Goa: rice and alsand, which is the bean that you know as lobia, black-eyed peas. It's one of the few beans that grows in a tropical climate like Goa. So she had sacks of rice and alsand, and she just gave them to a bunch of volunteers and said, just go ahead and distribute this. And so the bunch of volunteers, including my partner, went out and actually went to construction sites, to old people, etc., to distribute these very basics of rice and beans. It came around to as basic as that. Then other things happened. We suddenly realized that it was summer. It was the beginning of summer, and suddenly there was actually food all around us. We just had to realize it. I mean, there was jackfruit, for instance. That was a season when jackfruit was just getting green and large, and the perfect time to cut and cook katal. I mean, my one regret, Sadaf, is that in your book Dastan-e Dastan, you have this wonderful recipe for kairi and katal do piyaza, right?
Yeah.
And I kept saying that your book came out somewhere around that time, and I was kept saying, because I really want to cook this because this is ideal. There's katal and there's green mango, and I never cooked it. I mean, the recipe is from where?
This was experimental. So I found this in Gujarat. Somebody was cooking this, and so that's where a lady I just noted her recipe.
Yeah. So, but as I said, this made me aware. Us aware of all the food that's literally growing on trees and all around us.
Yeah.
And I think lockdown should be. I mean, I don't know if it's actually going to be in the long term. It should be have been a way to kick us into starting conversations about food security, food systems, understanding the precariousness of these food systems, and how we need to compensate on the fact that often, markets will not always deliver what we want. So that, I think, made me understand that we need to start talking about hunger. We need to start talking about food systems. And this is not a conversation that, as I said, we can leave to public policy specialists.
Yeah. Just one thing, Vikram, because both of you, like what Archit was asking the same lines and what you were saying, right? How much of a role does hunger play in food, or hunger and waste both, in food innovation? That when you're creating new things or just eating, does hunger make people really think better on utilizing ingredients and food material better?
Well, it has to. I mean, and we see this pattern happening repeatedly, through the decades, as India has tried to grapple with this issue of hunger. So for instance, in South India now, you have all these products made with wheat, which were typically not the case. You never had things like Malabar parotas and things like that in Kerala in the past. A lot of these products really only started coming in post the 60s, when, to deal with the acute crop failures in the 1960s, India was forced to start accepting American aid. And of course, the Americans typically would give aid in the form that was convenient to them, which was actually their farm surplus. They had these vast surpluses of wheat. So we started getting in all this wheat. But if you talk back, and maybe people like your grandmother or something will remember, even in parts of India which were used to eating wheat, this American wheat came as a real shock, because number one, it was high gluten wheat. Because that's what they wanted. They wanted wheat which is high in gluten for making bread, whereas Indian the sort of wheat that we were used to eating in India is low gluten wheat, which is more ideal for making things like our chapatis and parotas. And you have many people remembering at the time that there was horrible, how hard the chapatis were with this wheat. I mean, so a lot of people were forced to innovate, and especially in South India, a lot of the innovations involved ways to use this. So actually, Malabar parota uses so much fat that in it that it sort of takes care of the gluten. I mean, basically, if you add that much fat to wheat, then you're going to end up with something tasty. Even bread. I mean, the consumption of bread. You always had pockets like Goa, where there was bread. And to be honest, I'm increasingly interested in where Goa used to get its wheat from. It's not actually clear, because wheat does not grow in Goa. And it shows the sort of wide-ranging trade that happened with Portuguese India. Some wheat seems to have come from Madhya Pradesh, the central India. Some wheat seems to have come from Punjab, Karachi, where you had a large Goan population. Some wheat even came from Russia, because again, Russia, this is one of the problems, that so much of our history is so Western dominated. We tend to see everything in terms of flows from India and Europe. And we ignore that through most of the 19th century, Russia was a major exporter of wheat to Asia and the Middle East, through the Black Sea and Odessa. And so I suspect some of the wheat was even coming from Russia. But I said that was just Goa. After the 70s onwards, you see wheat growing, wheat consumption growing. And one of this is as a response to the sort of wheat that we got from the USA in the 1960s.
That's very interesting. And, one unintended consequence of the Green Revolution and this import of wheat was that India reduced the amount of coarse cereal that we consumed. So I think it declined from 35% to 5% in rural areas from 1961 to 2011. And millets, as you know, are gluten-free, so they don't spike up your blood sugar levels like the kind of wheat that we got from the US does. And also they are a good source of nutrition. And a lot of poor in India are malnourished and anemic because a lot of them just eat the roti with water, right? So if you eat wheat with water versus if you eat millets with water, there's a huge difference in the kind of nutrition levels you get. Do you think this?
Yeah, but see, Archit, this is an excellent example of where I think public policy people need to talk to food people. Because I've heard this endlessly that, we need to eat more millets. And I agree, we need to eat more millets. In my diet, I eat a lot of millets. Millets are great. Millets are nutritious. So why don't we eat more millets? Why don't, poor people, even when they have access to millets, actually want to eat millets, and they would prefer eating rice and wheat? And the part of the answer is actually in the name. Millet comes from meal, which means thousands. Now, millets is a confusing term. Millets actually is not one family, like rice and wheat are basically from the same family. Millets actually are a range of grasses and even certain pseudo cereals, which are not actually cereals, like buckwheat and amaranth and things like that. Yeah. But the characteristic about most of them, not all, but most of them, is that the seeds are very, very small. That's why. And so millet comes from meal, which means thousands. Each head of a millet, of a plant called millet, would have thousands of these tiny seeds. Now, what is the consequence of so many tiny seeds? It means you can't mill them. You can't remove the seed coating. Okay. Well, with wheat, what makes white bread so acceptable to people is that you can mill off the husk. Okay, leaving just the starchy part. Okay, and yes, this makes wheat less nutritious because a lot of the nutrients are in the things, but it also makes it more digestible. It makes it easier to eat. It makes it more pleasurable. One thing we all take for granted is that we all have access to dentists, and we have great teeth, hopefully. But a lot of poor people don't. And historically, the problems with teeth are why a lot of poor people instinctively went for like softer grains when they had access. To it. Another great example is the spread of maize around the world. Okay, maize comes to is a crop of the New World, and it comes to the Asia and India sometime in the 17th and 18th centuries, and very rapidly it looks like maize displaces millets. There are actually references from British writers who talk about maize, because these are two crops that grow in very similar ways. They require similar conditions. They have two crops a year. So there are actually references where you can see where maize is displacing millet. And the reason for this is maize is more delicious. It is much more starchy. It's larger grains. It's easier to eat. So, this is the problem. Now, where food people can come in is food people can tell public policy people that, it's all very well to say that millets are great in nutrition. We should all be eating millets, which is true. But unless you can find a way to make millets more palatable to people and easier to cook and easier to eat, people are not going to eat millets.
Yeah.
Have you tried cooking with millets, Sadaf?
I have since past 5-6 months, I have replaced rice and kept only millet.
But it's not easy, right? You have to do tweaks. I mean, you have to add more water. Sometimes it works. You have to do called in Andhra, you've seen called ragi sangati, which is a mix of rice and ragi, millets. Sometimes you have to mix up the grains. Just jumping straight into millets is never easy.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, even now as well, it is not easy because, again, what you were mentioning, rice is much more softer. And also, I think our brain works that way. Like, for example, even though we know that samosa, let's say baked samosa is healthier than fried samosa, but our mind will reject it because we've always been accustomed to sort of eat fried samosa.
Right.
And that's like eating millets every day. And even though I sort of add everything, but make it really chatpata, add dressing, add whatever. And yet mind kind of refuses it, saying, no, it is very harsh on your palate. You might feel hungry, even though it is nutrition. But yeah.
So I said, the millets are a great example of why I think public policy and food people really have to talk to each other and find ways to make millets acceptable to people. It's no good going and telling people you have to eat millets. People are not going to do it.
Yeah. Is this a reason why you think 2022, they are saying, is the year of millets?
Yeah, they've been saying this for a long time. But listen, unless people make a conscious effort to understand what millets, and I said millets are not the same thing. I mean, ragi, for instance, is very different from the others. Ragi is actually softer. Ragi doesn't have this problem of being very coarse, but on the other hand, ragi has another problem. It becomes very gluey. Like when ragi cools, it's delicious when it's hot. But when it cools, you've seen this, Sadaf, right? It becomes this hard, gluey mass. I mean, have you ever had this thing called ragi mudde in Karnataka? No, ragi mudde is a fascinating dish. It's the one dish that I know that can actually try and strangle you. If you're not careful, you are learning how to eat ragi mudde is a real art. You have to take just a little bite and you have to cover lots of liquid and then swallow it. And it shouldn't be too hot because it's very easy to choke yourself to death on ragi mudde.
It's very tricky actually. Full marks to people who there's really great food people in Bangalore called the Bangalore Utta Company who actually gave lessons on how to eat ragi mudde. You need lessons on how to eat ragi mudde. As I said, it's one food that can take its revenge on you if you're not careful. That's why I make sure that I am just boiling ragi. So two other grains that I think apart from quinoa, like quinoa and couscous, I think the other millets also like ragi and kodo. So they're also really soft. Of course, there's samak as well, but I think ragi and kodo are healthier, also softer. But you need to maybe not, maybe not necessarily make the flour of it and then put ghee.
Right.
Vikram, is there also a cultural insecurity in India when it comes to food? For example, we could say that we ate a lot of bread because the West ate bread and the West is a superior civilization. Do you think that influences food choices as well?
To a large extent, yes. I mean, and it's true. I mean, certain types of food are seen as aspirational. I don't think this happened in India as much as it did in other parts of Asia. For instance, in Japan, there was a very conscious effort on the parts of the Americans when they were occupying Japan after World War II to market wheat, which was conveniently American wheat, as the superior to Japanese rice. And because the Japanese were starving at that time, they had little options. So, the idea of white bread, and if you've ever had this very soft, pillowy Japanese bread, that became aspirational. Even ramen noodles, which we now see as so typically Japanese. I mean, wheat noodles were not actually common in Japan at all. They used to eat buckwheat noodles, which again is a type of pseudo cereal. But ramen, which we all know and love, is a product of the post World War II years when the Japanese were pretty much forced to eat wheat. So yes, I mean that has happened to some. I would like to think that in India we still like our rice and roti. I mean, we haven't entirely gone down the bread route, and there's nothing wrong with bread. I mean, the thing is we need to appreciate all these things for themselves.
Absolutely.
Mudde is also up north, like Uttarakhand, right?
I mean, ragi.
Ragi mudde.
As in, they have a kind of ragi porridge, like nachni porridge. Even in Goa, ragi is one of the key grains in Goa. It actually grows locally. So they're actually delicious ragi breads, ragi dodol, ragi sweets, which are traditional to Goa. Ragi is actually a very key grain for very large parts of India, partly because it also stays very well.
And then you're right, it's harder to cook roti also with ragi because it sticks to the pan, and I mean it's harder with jowar and bajra as well. But for women in the kitchen, typically women are in the kitchen,
right?
It's more time consuming and challenging to create ragi or millet rotis for multiple people every day.
And that's actually a really important point, because you bring in, because again, this is one of the problems that I sometimes find with the public policy approach to food. It does not look at who is actually making the food and what is convenient for them. And this is actually not just a public policy thing. Even food writers are guilty of this. For instance, in recent years, I've seen many people talking about the value of traditional Indian vegetables. They were saying like, why don't we cook more things like banana flour? Why don't we cook more things like jackfruit? And I agree. I mean, this is important. As I started off by saying, during lockdown, we realized the importance of jackfruit. On the other hand, have you actually cleaned jackfruit? Have you actually cleaned banana flour? Sadaf, you have done it, right?
Not banana flour. Jackfruit, yes. Banana flour, I think, is a different ball game altogether.
Banana flour is a completely different ball game. I mean, you have to oil your hands just as you have to oil your hands for katal. But but also, each little flower has two parts actually that are inedible, which so for each tiny flower you have to keep picking like that. And I'm like, all these people, I love banana flour. I love anything made with bochar, all the Bengali ways of cooking banana flour. But all these people who say that, yes, we should be eating more banana flour, my response is, have you cleaned it? Are you going to clean it? And it's very important to realize this, because, we can talk about food solutions, food policy, etc. But unless we keep in mind the people who are actually going to make the food on a regular basis, many of this just won't work out. Why should women be stuck with really laborious ways of cooking food when there are simpler ways? I mean, women don't want to be stuck in the kitchen. And the fascinating example, I'm going to segue a bit over here. But as I said, I'm half South Indian, so this is something that gives me great pride and joy. Is what I call the rise of the idli. And this has been, I can't remember, going back decades, people have tried to find ways to mechanize the making of rotis. Okay, they have come up with roti machines. There's Rotimatic. You can go to the Golden Temple and find these gigantic roti making machines. It never really works. I mean, it works in specific contexts like the Golden Temple, where people basically have to take what is given to them. But try and sell roti machines to homes. It just does not work. And part of the reason for this is that making a roti is both simple and incredibly difficult. I remember speaking to Naomi Duguid, who's done this wonderful book called Flatbreads and Flavors, where she looks at flatbreads across the world. And she says that, honestly, the simple chapati roti is one of the most complicated things she has ever come across, despite having made flatbreads across the world. And the reason is because everybody is used from their childhood to having a roti made exactly the way they want. Somebody would like it slightly puffed out, somebody would like it slightly burned, somebody would like it a little soft. And the people who have been making rotis have been making rotis all their lives, and they know how to make it perfectly. And any roti machine is basically competing with perfection, and it's not going to happen. So, and each roti has to be made individually. So despite all our technological prowess, we have still not been able to mechanize the making of a roti. It is still incredibly time consuming. It is still incredibly time consuming of the work and labor of lots of women and the poorer people we employ as servants. Okay, compare that with idlis. Idlis is actually a different ballgame altogether. Idlis, when for up till around the 70s, people outside South India barely knew idlis. It was something that was vaguely you knew from. As I said, you had a South Indian auntie, maybe who was a neighbor. You'd be lucky to get idlis. But today you can get idlis across India. Dhabas now are as likely to serve idlis as they are to serve rotis in North India as much as in South India. In Goa, I can go out and there are people who are making idlis, not great idlis, but they're making idlis over here. And the reason for this is idlis were able to mechanize for two inventions. One is the wet grinder. Okay, the wet grinder, which you have seen, which basically mechanizes that process of grinding the idli batter, is an invention that comes up somewhere around Coimbatore in the 1970s, I think. And we still don't. There's somebody who's written, a couple of guys have written books about this, but we still don't know for sure who invented it. But basically, around Coimbatore, this innovation comes up of attaching a stone grinder. Keep in mind, okay, it's still a stone grinder inside a steel vessel, and attaching that to a machine. And that so suddenly the grinding of idli batter becomes way easier. And around the same time, you see the introduction of pressure cookers to Indian kitchens. Pressure cookers come to India. There were early models in the 1940s, etc., but they really only come in around the 1950s and 1960s, when certain innovation, because pressure cookers in the early days were extremely dangerous things. People were scared of them with very good reason. Even up till when I was growing up, there were stories of pressure cookers exploding and things and things like that. But 2 or 3 innovations happened. One is the rubber gasket was perfected, and also also the fuse, which would melt when the pressure got too high. These two inventions from the 70s onwards really made pressure cookers safe to use in the house. And then people realized that if you just take the weight off, a pressure cooker works as a steamer. Yeah. So suddenly, you had a machine to make the idli batter, and you had a machine which you already have anyway for cooking dals, which could also make idlis. Idlis were scalable. Rotis are not, to put it in management talk. And idlis have triumphed.
Yeah.
Simply because they were easier to make in the kitchen. They took away effort from people in the kitchen. And that is the secret. If you want an innovation to work in Indian kitchens, you have to make it easy for the people who are actually cooking.
Yeah. I think
so. Devdutt Patnaik, who was also on our show, he mentioned something very interesting. He said that if you compare India with the overall West, in India, everything is swad anusar. When it comes to food and when it comes to religion as well, everybody worships their own god. Everybody has their own way of perfecting roti. My mother would have perfect roti for my family, and somebody else's mother would have perfect roti for their family, which is perhaps why something like a roti maker doesn't work in India.
Yeah. But I mean, the counter to Devdutt is a very good friend, so you don't mind my saying it, is that then how does he explain the idli? How does he explain the use of the idli? I mean, people are also willing to experiment in certain fixed ways. I mean, we are not. I think it's confusing. I still don't understand. Are we adventurous eaters or are we not? I think it's a bit of both. We like innovations, but innovations within a framework. Too much of a change is somehow jarring. Goes beyond a frame. And what do you guys think, Sadaf? You've been a professional chef. How much innovation? How accepting of innovation are Indian eaters?
I would say it depends on the state to state. For example, I would say Bangalore is very open to accept things. Gurgaon is open to accept new things. Delhi isn't. I always keep telling people that Delhi people like food. They hog food. They don't appreciate food. So in that sense, innovation is limited. However, I think innovation is coming in the delivery of it. So, for example, you're making a croissant. Right now, you don't really need a dough. There's a machine doing that job. Even the folding thing, there's a machine doing that job. With the invention of deep freezer, you can store your croissant batter or the croissant mix for like months, right? So that's what I remember speaking with a couple of, I think last year, 2019, with Chef Saransh Goila. And he was talking about that he experimented, or he tried this one biryani, which was 6 months old. And that was kept in deep freeze, airtight in airtight container. The idea was also that can we, I don't know who was inventing this, but the idea was to convince, can we keep such kind of food, and biryani being really greasy and all that, right? Can we keep those food in airtight container, which lasts forever? And he said 6 months, and the innovator was planning to do like a 1 year thing. So I think in those sense, there was innovation coming in, really nice ones. But then of course there were a lot of failed innovations, which you mentioned about roti maker. I have personally experienced that. I don't like roti maker, neither do I like that automatic roti kneader. It's good for bread, what you mentioned. Right. It's good to make breads, but I don't think it really works to make when you're making a roti.
Yeah, but there's again, this is where we look at time. Sadaf, don't mind my saying this. Look at the examples you just gave me. You said Bangalore, you said Gurgaon. You're only talking about metros. I mean, there is so much more to what is happening in food outside the metros. And to me, honestly, some of the most fascinating examples are actually not coming from the metros. Are coming from small towns, from like from roadside dabas, things like this. I mean, like there's this amazing innovation called tandoori chai. Have you guys ever had this?
Yep.
Tandoori chai, as far as I can make out, was invented. It seems to have come up along the dabas outside Pune. And from Pune, it's been spreading like across like the highways across Maharashtra, and it's coming to Bombay, but actually only the outskirts of Bombay. Just to explain what a tandoori chai is, I mean, it's chai which is then put in a kulhad, but a superheated kulhad. I mean, a kulhad is put in a tandoor until it heats up. And then the chai is poured into it, and it sort of froths up and takes on some of the earthy flavors. It's a bit of drama, I mean, to be honest, but it's also some taste, and it shows how people, are willing to get innovations, but it's still chai. It's not they're pushing them too far. So, I mean, innovations are possible, but you have to respect the people who are consuming it.
True. I think, I can talk about Ranchi, for example, and they're also coming up with a lot of, because I was there, I grew up there. So they also come with a lot of various kinds of innovation of not just cooking food, but storing food, serving it. Like tandoori chai is, I would say, what is in drama, right? I would say it's a way of serving it, how you want to serve the whole thing. I think, and also I think
Sadaf, here's where I want you to tell us a story, because in your book, one of the most beautiful stories is the one you start off with, about how your grandmother invented an aloo salan without meat, and I think that's a story that people need to hear.
Yeah. Oh, so that was
I didn't know this. I mean, apart from the book, even you haven't narrated it on the show.
So it was a funny thing. Before my birth, we had a Peer Baba. This is a story from Sasaram, Bihar. I will be there sooner than later now during Diwali. So my grandmother had this Sufi Peer Baba who always used to come almost every Thursday and Thursday Fridays. And because when Peer Baba is coming, you need to feed him something. And I again call it a stereotype or whatever, but I think Muslims have something with Fridays. Fridays ko meat banna hai. Period. Also because weekends. So weekends hai, so now you eat non-veg food. So Peer Baba ko bhi, when he used to come for lunch on Fridays post his namaz, Jume ki namaz, then you will get the food. However, this one fine day, he came a little early, one day in advance, and we were not prepared. Now, because we were not prepared, what to do? And also because Peer Baba, so you can't really say, oh, nahi, kuch khane ko nahi hai. Peer Baba also always used to carry his own roti as well, called besani, ya phir besan ki roti. But we made that, and what Nani did was quickly whipped up aloo, because potato is in abundance, right? And again, I think in the last aloo podcast, we did discuss that if you want to feed in mass, then you need potato, and also tastes good because gravy. So that's what happened. But then she also said, okay, because Peer Baba, we'll add some other things, which is dry fruits and fig and all. And that sort of complemented, because there's a little bit of sweetness and then there's a little bit of chili in that, the whole thing. So I think that the innovation is that I think I connected. He was hungry. Now you don't have meat. What would you do? You serve this with really nice roti. Yeah.
I mean, and that is such a lovely story, because it shows so many things. It shows your grandmother was obviously a great natural cook, because a natural cook knows how to innovate. It's very easy being a good chef when you have fantastic ingredients. I mean, like when in a big hotel and your commissary is giving you like lamb from New Zealand and salmon from Alaska. Yeah, sure, you can be great chef when your ingredients are great. But I think a real challenge of being a good chef is when this sort of situation, when you have to improvise with what you have, which again goes back to lockdown, when we again suddenly had to realize we had to make do with what we had, at foods that were local, foods that were at hand, foods that were growing on our trees. And that again is one of the realizations I think that we need to have, that we should not depend on everything coming in on foods that are delivered to us by the market systems, by large corporations. Not that I have a problem with corporations, but that's a different discussion. But we need to be able to a real understanding of food, and this is where chefs and people like you have to lead this discussion. That we need to pay a greater awareness of how to cook with what we have, which is what your grandmother did. The other reason I love this story and so many other stories in your book, because again it breaks through the stereotype that all Muslim cooking is about meat only. Yes, Muslim cooking is about a lot about meat, but it's not only about meat. And this is one of these really unfortunate, even dangerous stereotypes that has come in the sort of time that we live in. That to be Muslim or to you have to be not Hindu means you have to eat like meat. You have to eat lots and lots of meat, and all sides are complicit in this. I mean, to some extent, I think even some Muslims and some meat eaters are complicit, because when they start eating meat, they think they only have to eat meat. That I see this in Goa all the time. People when they come to Goa, they ask me what sort of food to have. And their idea of food is that very typically meat-heavy food that is promoted as Goan food in the tourist sense. This is complete rubbish. Okay, that food is often really bad. Especially in so-called Goan restaurants, is everything doused in one kind of masala called reshad masala, which is boring as shit after a point. And it also does not reflect what Goans actually eat in the house. Goan Hindu food is fantastic. I like all Konkani food. It involves, vegetables. It involves some fish. It involves dried fish, again, which is a great flavor ingredient that we tend to overlook. It involves a lot of local vegetables. I would say if you come to Goa, you should always try and find Goan Hindu food. And at the same time, I know that's not easy because it's very hard to get because nobody cooks it. Because in restaurants, people will cook it at homes. There are a few caterers who will make great Goan Hindu food for you. But even Goan Catholics, they don't eat meat all the time. I mean, they eat a little bit of meat with a lot of other vegetables and a lot of other grains. And what I get from your book is exactly that a lot of Muslim home cooking involves, things like chukandar gosht and things like that, where vegetables are cooked with a little bit of meat, not this intense meat-heavy focus. Unfortunately, this is the sort of polarization that either you're a vegetarian, you have to eat only vegetarian food, or if you're non-vegetarian, you can only eat meat, which is like just to me completely absurd.
I remember there was a discussion happening as well, and this person said, I don't remember who said it, I'm a part-time vegetarian, non-vegetarian. And what does that even mean? So the person said that I don't eat meat every day. So I said, yeah, I mean, I don't eat meat every day. They're like only select 2 days or 3 days maybe in a week. But I never call myself a part-time non-veg or part-time vegetarian. I'm like, I am non-vegetarian because I'm eating meat. Yeah, but not like I am somebody who loves dal. I am somebody who loves my vegetables, but also of course meat. So, yeah, it's an interesting. I think it's a debate for a different discussion altogether.
Vikram, you talk about the origins of the term non-vegetarian, which is very unique to India. Tell us something about that.
I mean, nowhere else in the world you have this like term non-vegetarian. I mean, the term emerges in the sometime in the 19th century in sort of vegetarian in sort of vegetarian movements in the UK. But it's only in India that it has become a common term. I mean, otherwise, non-vegetarian is a really oddball term, and to me it is a problematic term because it sort of puts things into a binary straight off, either vegetarian or non-vegetarian. And as I said, unfortunately, it's a binary that even non-vegetarians accept, because you assume that if you are non-vegetarian, you have to eat meat and only meat. And so I know so many non-vegetarians would proudly tell me that they eat almost no vegetables, which to me is like ridiculous. One of the joys of being a non-vegetarian is that you can actually eat vegetarian food, and India's huge range of wonderful vegetarian food. You can also eat something which I personally am getting much more interested in, what I call semi-vegetarian food, which is mostly vegetarian food, which was cooked with just a little bit of meat. Now, I find these dishes are actually very intrinsic, very traditional to India. Sadaf, these are the sort of books that are some of the recipes you are there in your book. I mean, vegetables, where the focus is the vegetables, but flavored with a little bit of meat. And especially along the coasts of India, especially like Konkan, where we are, these are really important foods for one particular reason. During the monsoon, fish, of course, is one of the main proteins along the coast of India. But we also have our monsoons when fishing pretty much stops, simply because of the violence of the weather. Now, during the monsoons, people have to, and again, along the coast of India, you never really had many other types of meats. I mean, things like, chicken, mutton, etc. were very rare, very, very for special occasions. Pork was unusual to Goa and parts of Tamil Nadu. But traditionally, you didn't really have other sources of meat. So during the monsoons, people depended a lot on dried fish, and dried prawns, dried fish, and these are incredibly important, especially during the monsoons. They're incredibly important from flavors. Dried fish is a flavor bomb. It's an umami bomb. You can add dried prawns. The lady who cooks for us sometimes makes a dish of pumpkin and dried prawns, which is one of the most delicious things I've eaten. It's just a complete, the dried prawns, just a little bit that she uses, just add this huge umami kick to like the pumpkin. These are also really important dishes because they're nutritionally excellent. I mean, they have all the benefits of vegetables, plus they add the few amino acids that vegetables can't bring in by themselves. They're environmentally great because one thing anybody who understands the environment realizes that this huge push towards eating more and more meat is environmentally devastating. But at the same time, we have all these dishes which are mostly vegetables or grains, but flavored with a little bit of meat. It's also interesting that many of these dishes don't use the premium cuts of meat. Many of them use like offals, things like that, side cuts, things like dried prawns, small dried prawns, not the giant tasteless monsters that we get in restaurants all the time. And to me, these dishes are really important, but they're vanishing because they are falling between this vegetarian, non-vegetarian binary. Restaurants will not serve them because vegetarians won't eat them. But non-vegetarians won't eat them either because they're not meaty enough for non-vegetarians. So despite the fact that these sort of semi-vegetarian dishes are some of the best things you can eat in Goa, there is hardly any restaurant which will serve you anything like them. And this is why I think, what people like you are chronicling, like in Dasar Kwan, are so important. We need to record these sort of semi-vegetarian dishes. And I don't know, find some ways to get people to start cooking them or even restaurants to start serving them.
So I'm reminded of this one, again, one more dish, which is semi-vegetarian, which comes from Bihar, I believe, which is called angushti. Now, angushti is, and I was telling the same thing to Shubha a couple of days back as well, which is when you are done making Bihari kebab, what would you do with the leftover masala? And again, Bihar being a poor state back in days as well, and still it is, don't want to throw away or waste anything, right? So, and same with the marination. And nowadays, chefs would say, oh, don't throw away the marination because so much of flavor, etc., etc. They knew back in days as well. So what they would do is take the masala, add atta in this, and a little bit of sugar, and then knead it. And then that goes back on the tandoor, the open tandoor, basically, not the angithi jisko bolte. So angithi. And then you grill it again. And that's called angushti because of the finger imprints. So angutha, say angushti. It goes well with your Bihari kebab. Also, no wastage whatsoever. And it falls between a semi-vegetarian because you're still using the same marination of the kebab. It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and I said, these are the sort of stories, these are the sort of recipes that people really need to bring in. I mean, food wastage is a huge issue in India. The amount of, this is the obscenity. We have starving people, we have people who are severely malnourished, and we have this incredible amount of food waste that is happening in India. And this is where, as I said, there needs to be a conversation between food people and policy people and the government to find ways to reduce food waste, to find ways to use stuff that is otherwise thrown away. And these are really important discussions.
True. So I think the conversations can go endless because this is the amazing thing. First, I think we'll take a break and others can in the meanwhile find the recipe of how to use banana peel in making banana bacon. Hum milte hain break ke baad. Now, the last segment, Vikram, and I have this one huge issue with a lot of people. I absolutely have nothing against veganism or vegetarianism. It's absolutely a great thing to do. Find alternative food options. My issue, however, is what I was talking about before the break about banana bacon or vegan chicken or vegan chicken nuggets, etc., etc. I mean, if you're vegan or if you're vegetarian, you do want to have veg only. And in fact, I think I'll take a step back as well. Is when we talk about jackfruit, we say, oh, jackfruit tastes like mutton. No, it doesn't. And the texture is like mutton. What would you sort of say to such fad?
Yeah, now, this is actually interesting. That's very important to me because, as I said, I'm increasingly interested in issues of sustainability and also interested in issues of animal welfare, partly because my partner works on animal welfare. He's a lawyer who works on animal welfare. But also because animal welfare, animal raising, farmed animal meat, which is really what the vegan movement is opposing, is involved in so many issues, of environment, environment and sustainability at the moment. So I find these products really interesting. But yes, I see where you're coming from. It is a problem, calling them bacon or chicken when. To me, the real problem with calling it that is that it sets itself up for failure. You will eat it and yes, as you said, katal, green jackfruit is a great product in itself. As soon as you say it's like mutton, and your instinctive reaction is like, no, it's not like mutton, and then you don't like it because of that. Instead of appreciating the fact that katal is a great product in itself. That soy is an important product. It's really important. People don't realize that soy is like one of the mainstays of the midday meal program in India. So soy is one of the key things that we have to talk in if we want to talk about hunger and malnutrition. Having said that, I also understand where these people are coming from, because they're trying to create a paradigm shift, and they have pushing technology. Now, yes, these PETA products may not have worked. Have you tried Beyond Meat?
No, not yet.
Okay, try it, and then we come back and we have this discussion. Beyond Meat, which is now being sold in India, these are the two big US companies working on alternate foods. There's Beyond Meat, which is using plant-based products using yellow pea protein isolate, and there is Impossible Foods, which is using soy. Beyond Meat is radically different. Okay, my mother is an arch vegan skeptic. I'm not a vegan, though I sympathize and I'm interested in vegan issues. I eat everything. Though on my day-to-day basis, my diet is usually plant-based. But my mother is, like many people, a huge vegan skeptic. She's nothing she likes better than making fun of vegans. So recently, when I was in Chennai, where she lives, I found a packet of Beyond Meat burgers and Beyond Meat sausages, which are being imported and sold in India. Now, it's still very expensive, so I'm not saying this is going to become common, but it's the technology in the next 5 years will bring the cost down rapidly. So I cooked the burgers and the sausage, and I gave it to her to try. And I said, remember, she's a huge vegan skeptic. She tasted and said, like, this is remarkable. What Beyond Meat has achieved is it's not going to be like the best meat you've ever eaten. But honestly, how often, every time do we eat meat, is it the best meat we've ever eaten? No, it's not. Most of us are eating just regular meat, which is from the butcher, which is frankly from a factory farm system. Beyond Meat is better than that. Okay. The burgers, the sausages, they have that slightly grainy, that slightly fatty texture of meat. And keep in mind that this is a technology that is at the starting stage. I think the potential that Beyond Meat, and I can't comment about Impossible Foods because I haven't tried it, but I have tried Beyond Meat, and I really recommend, suggest people, try it. People are ready to try weird things. They'll go abroad and they trade snakes and scorpions, etc. But when I say try Beyond Meat, they say, "Oh God, no! Why would I want to try something like that?" I mean, what is wrong with you? It's just a burger. It's like it's manufactured. If you're eating a biscuit, that's as manufactured as a Beyond Meat product is manufactured.
Yeah.
Beyond Meat to me is a paradigm shift, and one of the problems is it has to deal with the fact that there have been so many failures in terms of like the jackfruits and things, which people have said people are associating with that. It's not. It's like when it's like when the iPhone came, and yes, you had mobile phones before. The iPhone was a paradigm shift. Beyond Meat is like that, and to me, this is a discussion that needs to happen, because factory farming is a problem. Factory farming is a problem in huge and multiple ways. It's a problem in terms of animal welfare. It's a problem in terms of environmental welfare. It's a problem in terms of health, because so many zoonotic diseases are clearly being bred within the factory farming system. People don't, people often, hear about antibiotic use in factory farming. They don't often realize why antibiotics are used in factory farming. If people think, we think of antibiotics only in terms of health. Actually, antibiotics also help animals grow faster. So one major reason, this is a discovery that happened in the 1950s in the US. And even today, people are not entirely sure why this happens. But a few scientists discovered that if you feed chickens a high dose of antibiotics when they're chicks, they grow really fast. They gain weight, they grow really fast. Sadaf, you may know this. I don't know if Archit does this. How old is a broiler chicken when it's killed?
It's usually lesser than 120 days. 100 is full blown. I think lesser than that.
Yeah, a broiler chicken is culled at less than 2 months. Okay, a brinjal grows 4 months. It takes 4 months to grow a brinjal. To me, this is one of the things that is deeply disturbing about broiler chicken. And I say this knowing, Archit, you are the big butter chicken enthusiast, and I don't want to put you on the spot over here. But to me, I said I eat meat. Okay, I'm not going to give up meat. But if there's one thing I suggest people do, and for multiple reasons, is really reconsider broiler chicken. Because A, it's tasteless. Honestly, all chefs will tell you broiler chicken tastes of like, it's like non-vegetarian paneer. Okay, we can add great things to it, etc. We can make it taste tasty because you're skillful as a chef, but broiler chicken itself tastes, you compare a good desi chicken, which is stringy and this thing, etc., but cooked well. With the broiler chicken is fucking tasteless. Okay, it's as I said, it takes less time to grow than most vegetables. Okay, it has this huge amount of antibiotics and hormones in it, which is why it grows so fast. The environmental impact of this is also huge. The last reason is something which is very intrinsic to Goa. Is one thing we're seeing in Goa and right across the coast of India is the plummeting catches. Fishermen are all recording, historically low catches, and the reason for this is that there are these trawler ships. Earlier, fishermen would catch certain types of fish. Traditional fishermen would catch, you'd go out and catch your bangda or your pomfret or things like that. Now you have these gigantic trawlers which are coming up and just scraping the seabed clean of everything, of any kind of a marine organism. And you go to, it's not so much present in Goa because traditional fishermen still have some. You go to places like Mangalore, you really see this in a big way. These ships come with any kind of marine organism. It's all just pumped out and it's just dried and churned up and made into chicken feed. Chickens grow on the pretty much the rape of the oceans. If you value seafood, don't eat chicken. So as I said, Archit, I'm not to put you on a spot. Please eat as much butter chicken as you want. But I mean, this is one thing I think food people need to talk about a little bit more. Talk about the problems in factory farming. And the fact that nobody's asking you to give up meat. I mean, go ahead, have a great desi chicken, eat seafood, eat meat, the meat you want, but eat good meat. And if for the rest of your time, a product like Beyond Meat can help, give you, I'm sure, just give it time, you'll have a great Beyond Meat butter chicken. Will you have it?
I would not have a Beyond Meat butter chicken, but I would like to have a desi chicken butter chicken. And interestingly,
but why? I'm putting you on the spot here. Why won't you have a Beyond Meat butter chicken?
I am personally skeptical of any food that has been designed in a lab, and might be open to it in future, but right now I'm skeptical. Okay. I believe that food needs to be time tested. Only then will you know all the effects of that particular food item on the human body.
See, there's a basic confusion here. Okay? There are two types of alternate meat products. One is the actual meat analogs, which are, as you said, being grown in labs. And I accept that this is a thing that many people are going to have problems with. But this is what is on sale. For instance, it's on sale in Singapore at the moment. Whether this is a scalable product is still very much open. And yes, a lot of people have problems with actual lab, because actual lab grown meat is actual meat, but just grown within a laboratory. And yes, many vegans will also have a problem with that. Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat are manufactured foods. They're not made in labs, they're made in factories. If you're eating a biscuit, if you're eating a processed food product, you should be able to eat a Beyond Meat product. There's no difference between them.
I prefer not to eat those either. And I don't mean that they were each of them is designed in a lab, or rather each of them is grown in a lab. Their recipe is designed in a lab and it's optimized for one thing, to taste like meat. That I have a problem with, because I agree with what Sadaf said earlier. Vegetarian food should be eaten for its own sort of value. I love to eat a kebab with rajma, chana, and soy. I wouldn't eat it as vegetarian galauti kebab, but I would eat it because it is tasty in itself and has its own benefits. So I prefer eating these vegetarian alternatives made with local ingredients at home rather than made in bulk at factories. But that's personally what I believe, and my opinion could change. It's not very strict right now.
You had a potato podcast.
Yeah.
Have you eaten Pringles potato chips?
I have eaten, but I don't regularly eat it.
Okay. But Pringles is a completely manufactured product, and it sells like gangbusters. Quality walls,
I agree.
Frozen desserts, manufactured product. They do very well. And as I said, it's not taking away the experience. If you can afford it, if you have the control, yes, we will eat premium potato products. We will eat premium ice cream. But what these products offer us is a chance to give us an alternative to the bulk of the market. with all the benefits of of environmental issues, animal issues, the health issues that come with it. To me, I mean, this is a conversation why food people need to be involved with it.
Yeah,
and please,
I
please try the Beyond Meat products when they come.
I will try it. I'm open to trying it out. I don't see it as a regular part of my diet for the reasons I told you, but I'm definitely open to trying it.
See, when your neighborhood like Momo guy starts giving you Beyond Meat momos, the Beyond Meat tandoori momos, then maybe.
When it becomes that common, that common and easily accessible.
Again, they use soy as an alternative
Absolutely.
to meat. So they're already doing something.
Already doing it.
Yeah, they're already doing it. Yeah. So that brings us to our last part, which is one of our favorite parts of the show, which is the underrated, overrated, and favorite part. So let's start with the slightly less controversial part, which is underrated. Which foods do you think are underrated, Vikram?
Okay, so I'll give you one which again links to something we were discussing earlier. You said you did this long podcast on potatoes.
Yeah.
Did you discuss sweet potatoes?
Very briefly. Very briefly.
And
not as much as we should have. Yeah,
you should have, because you see, sweet potatoes is unfortunately the things which are left out of the conversation in Indian potatoes. Yeah. Because the fact is, India is not a country really suited for potatoes. Potatoes grow only in colder areas of India in the winter and in the winter season, and then they have to be kept in these vast like cold storages, which add another layer of cost to it. And yet, because we have started accepting potatoes as the normal, you have, for instance, like one result of the lockdown last year is that the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, just like 2 weeks back, has announced that they're developing these varieties of potatoes that can grow in a place like Goa, and they're going to be promoting potato growing in Goa. To me, this is absurd. I mean, I have no problems with potatoes are great. I said my father felt that potatoes were the only vegetable that mattered. But the fact is that this obsessive focus on potatoes has obscured us to the importance of sweet potatoes in India. And sweet potatoes actually are much more important than most people realize. For one thing, they've been here longer. Again, I think in your podcast, you probably talked about the fact that somebody refers to sweet potatoes being consumed in Karnataka and Gujarat in the 17th century. There's a reference in 1675. Actually, it all comes down to one reference by an English writer called John Fryer, who goes to Karnataka, and he writes one line in his travelogue, saying that, talking about the people he meets in Karnataka, he says, sweet potatoes are their banquet, okay? He says potatoes are their banquet. Now, this one fact has been recorded and repeated, and it's been taken now as gospel that potatoes were there in the 17th century in Goa. I am very dubious about this for a couple of reasons. The assumption here is that the potatoes came with the Portuguese. This makes no sense to me, because the Portuguese colonial empire never touched on areas where there were potatoes. Potatoes come from South America, but the Portuguese were in South America, in Brazil, which is not a in coastal Brazil, which is not a potato growing country. And everywhere else we went, the Portuguese colonial empire was mostly in the tropical regions, not potato growing country. The colonial empire, which did interact with potatoes and which is documented as spreading potatoes, is the Spanish. The Spanish encountered potatoes in the Andes. The Spanish took potatoes to the Netherlands, which at that time, keep in mind, was part of the Spanish Empire. And from there, it spread across Europe. The Spanish may even have brought potatoes to Asia, because there's this really important part of global trade called the Manila galleons, which basically the ships that crossed the Pacific from Acapulco to Manila and took a lot of products from that route, west to east, and from where they entered China. Chilies probably also came that way to China, if not to India. So to me, this idea that the Portuguese spread potatoes is deeply dubious. And you see, the thing is, on the West Coast, all these are the tubers. If you ever, there are all these kinds of yams, there are all these kinds of colliers, what I call Chinese potatoes, kurka, if you've ever had them in. To me, it's very likely that what this one English dude did was he mistook like some local tuber for potatoes, and that fact has got repeated until even you guys repeated it and said that the Portuguese brought potatoes to India. But secondly, what the Portuguese did spread was sweet potatoes, because sweet potatoes are a crop that actually, not just the Portuguese, sweet potatoes have spread across the tropical world. It probably even crossed the Pacific through the Pacific Islanders for a couple of reasons. It's a crop that grows really well in tropical areas, in hot areas. It grows through the year. It's highly nutritious. Also, a key important factor: you can eat the leaves. Have you ever cooked potato leaves, Sadaf?
No.
Potato leaves are delicious. Sweet potato leaves. Sweet potato leaves are delicious. They're delicious and very nutritious. Potato leaves are toxic. Nobody should eat potato leaves. But sweet potato leaves are delicious and highly nutritious. So to me, this is a really good example of why, because of a focus on the West, because of a focus of the Western influence of things, we are neglecting something that is really typical to India. And I come back to a little bit, what we said earlier in the podcast. Innovations only become part of the kitchen if they're easy for people to cook. Sadaf, as a chef, you will know, how are most potatoes cooked in professional kitchens? Is somebody cleaning them and cooking them? Bullshit. They're opening a big bag of McCain's for frozen potato products.
Right.
Yeah, McCain's is an American company that dominates processed potatoes. And if you are eating any potato product, in a large quick service restaurant, I'm guaranteeing you it's come from McCain's or a similar company.
Nowadays you have ITC.
ITC, fine. ITC, which is copying McCain's.
Yeah.
Now, what needs to happen for sweet potatoes to become? Sweet potato fries are delicious. Okay, there are restaurants here in Goa which make sweet potato fries. And the thing is, McCain's internationally has sweet potato products. They have sweet potato products in the UK. You have sweet potato fries in the UK because people there are now aware of health and nutrition, and they want the complex carbs that sweet potatoes provide. To me, what is stopping McCain's from bringing sweet potato fries to India? Nothing, except they have the technology. All they need is the demand. All they need is chefs and consumers to say that, yes, we'll buy sweet potato products. So, sorry, this has been a very, 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 very long answer to a very simple question that you asked. But to me, this is an example of how all these things come together.
I really love Nigella Lawson's mashed potato recipe with sweet potato. That's absolutely fantastic. Adds another dimension to mashed
sweet potatoes. Rock, Sadaf.
I love it.
If you want to do one thing for me after this podcast, please come up with a great recipe for biryani with sweet potatoes.
Done. Only sweet potato?
I mean, other stuff also, but no potatoes. But instead of that Calcutta biryani which uses potatoes, try devise a version using sweet potatoes.
That's done. I will surely try it, because sweet potato is my favorite thing. It's apps, and especially a couple of years back in Delhi, I tried for the first time ever street side made that smoky grilled sweet potato.
And which we make with star fruit, sweet potato and star fruit, which is wonderful. No, it's one of the best Delhi potato.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I became a fan.
Now. I mean, I don't even know where you found it. There used to be these guys who would make sweet potato and star fruit chaat, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, you should find it at like pockets, but it's just, I just still love it. One of the reasons why the winters that I wait for is so that you get sweet potato in the market.
And to me, look, this is the creativity of street food. Who ever thought that star fruit, which grows easily and rapidly, I have a gigantic star fruit tree in my garden over here. But the problem with star fruit is that it looks very pretty, but it's a sort of insipid tasting fruit at best. But somehow some inspired street food guy realized that combining star fruit and sweet potato and then dusting it all with chaat masala give you this incredible healthy. It's also a healthy chaat because it's not fried. This incredibly tasty, healthy chaat.
Good.
And now to your favorite food.
I don't know. I mean, dal, actually, I think, again, Sadaf touched on dal a little earlier. And to me, dal is the key to Indian food. And again, people often don't realize why dal is so important, though the answer is in the name itself. Dal, we get the name dal because it's broken. I mean, dal is milled, dal is broken. I mean, the root in a very different sort of sense, is also gives you the roots of Dalit, the broken people, the people ground down by oppression. And again, this is something people ignore. Around the world, people eat pulses. Beans, pulses, lentils are very important in cultures across the world. India is one of the few places where we eat broken pulses, milled pulses. Yes, we also eat the sabut, like masoor with sabut, moong, etc. But a huge amount of what we eat is milled. Dal milling is one of these really big, important agro businesses that people often take no notice about. And milling does something very key. It makes it easy to cook. It makes it easy to digest. It makes it easy to break down. When you and Sadaf will know this as a chef. Like when you cook, the difference between cooking a sabut, a whole pulse, and a broken pulse is that the broken pulse will break down and give you that gravy, that sort of liquidy dal, which is really key to Indian food, because then we can mix it with rice. We can scoop it up with rotis, and also in khichdi, for example. Again, khichdi is this intrinsic Indian dish. But the reason why we cook it and why it's so digestible is because the dal is broken. And because the moong dal is broken, if you're cooking it with moong dal, it sort of dissolves and becomes more digestible and binds to the rice and gives you that delicious, semi-rice, semi-dal thing, which is khichdi. So to me, I mean, dal is hugely important in India, broken dal. But it's something we often don't realize how important it is.
I think dal is also the OG plant-based protein, and perfect for vegan.
Absolutely.
The products I'm talking about are made from that. Like Beyond Meat, for instance, is made with yellow pea protein, which is yellow pea protein. If you're willing to listen to 5 minutes more of a rant from me, is actually it's actually the food product that is much more important than most of us realize. Okay, we know of it in India as we think of yellow peas as something we eat in. If you eat in this Bombay dish called ragda patties, for instance, or things like that, or vatana or something, we think we eat it. Actually, all of us are eating yellow peas without realizing it. And the reason is that, as I said, one of the problems with the way we approach food is that we don't think of things that are really important. So all our focus in the Green Revolution was rice and wheat. Okay, dal never received that focus because the Green Revolution was this global thing, and rice and wheat is important globally, but dal is not. Dal is important only to Indians. And so dal has never received that sort of focused attention in agriculture that cereals and rice have received. Absolutely. The consequence of that is that we are still, 75 years after independence, still lagging hugely on pulse production. We do not produce enough pulses. The other problem with pulses, and it's a very Indian problem, is that we all don't like the same pulses. Typically, every part of India will eat 2 or 3 pulses, but we will hate the other pulses. Or we will eat it. We will eat rajma if we want to go to eat it, a Punjabi dish, but we won't eat it on a regular basis. We will eat moong in certain ways. We won't eat urad. I mean, everybody has 2 or 3 types of pulse that they eat, and they won't eat the other pulses. So it's not easy getting scale in pulses. This has put the Indian government at a big problem, that we are not growing enough pulses, but pulses are hugely important. So one answer, imports. The problem with imports is that it's easy to import rice, it's easy to import wheat, because everybody across the world grows rice and wheat. Not enough people grow the sort of pulses that only Indians eat. Tur dal, for instance. Who eats tur dal apart from Indians? I mean, for some bizarre historical reason, Puerto Ricans eat tur dal, but nobody's understood this why. Otherwise, tur dal is only eaten by Indians. Now, we have to get other countries to grow tur dal for us. Burma grows a lot of tur dal for us. And one reason why the Indian government keeps its mouth shut about human rights abuses in Burma is because we depend on Burma for a lot of tur dal and chickpeas. Australia and Canada are willing to grow tur dal for us, but they want forward contracts. Okay, they're not going to grow tur dal just in the anticipation in India, and because the Indian government never gets its act together in time. We never really managed to balance out our demand for tur dal with tur dal being grown internationally for the Indian market. What has happened to fill the gap? The answer is yellow peas. Yellow peas are grown in Canada on a vast scale. The prairie states, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, grow huge amounts of yellow peas. They always have. Historically, it was a rotation crop because, their legumes, they restore nutrition to the soil. So people would grow wheat for 2 crops and then yellow peas in between. And yellow peas were used largely for feeding livestock as animal feed. In the 19th century or the early 20th century, as Indians went as indentured labor to the Caribbean, they needed to be supplied dal, some type of pulses. And some colonial guy put the two together. They were like, we have Indians in the Caribbean who need pulses. We have Canadians, also part of the British Empire, conveniently enough, who are growing vast amounts of pulses. Let's connect the two. So if you look at any recipe for pulses from the Caribbean, from Trinidad or anywhere else, it's nearly all yellow peas. And at some point, I suspect in the 1960s or 1970s, the Canadians realized, hey, why are we just selling it to Indians in the Caribbean? Let's send yellow peas to Indians in India. And this is what happens. Every time we fall short in pulse production, we call the Canadians. There's a government organization called Pulse Canada, which has an office in Delhi, which basically exists to facilitate this. Yellow peas come in huge amounts to India, and we eat it without realizing it. Sadaf, you will have known the difference between besan, which is from chickpeas, and besan you buy commercially in the market. Everybody complains about it, that besan has changed. The reason besan has changed is because besan now is mostly yellow peas. Unless you know for yellow pea flour, unless you know for sure that it's coming from chickpeas, it's probably yellow pea flour. Okay,
that's a lot of people also picking it up from local, getting it grounded or picking it up.
Exactly. People say that the sambar, for instance. Okay, people say, why does sambar taste different in my home and why does sambar taste different in a restaurant? The answer is very simple. At home, you can make it with tur dal. Is any restaurant going to spend a huge amount of extra money for tur dal? Rubbish. Restaurants all use yellow peas. Okay, yellow pea flour. If you're eating sambar from a restaurant, it's made with yellow peas, unless it's like a restaurant you can really trust. Yeah. I mean, the weirdest is something. I think it was Tata's or something. They actually created a product called dal analog. Dal analog is basically manufactured dal. It's yellow pea flour, a little bit of soybean oil. You mix it into paste and you extrude it into pellets, and you have a dal which looks like tur dal, but it's actually yellow peas.
Oh.
And as I said, I'm not saying this is good or bad. Okay, I've actually cooked sambar with yellow peas and tur dal, and I've compared the two, and it's different. It's not that it's more. Yellow peas are slightly sweeter, slightly flourier. They have a slightly different texture, but it's not bad. It's acceptable sambar. It's a sambar you're eating in restaurants most of the time, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah.
But as I said, our not being aware of dal is what has enabled this sort of yellow pea explosion in India. It's become the food that we all eat, but we don't realize we eat.
Goes back to what you were saying about people actually growing it. There's a whole system.
And the final part is where Vikram tells us his overrated foods. And before you do that, Vikram, I have to clarify that chicken is also my overrated food. And the only exception to that is butter chicken. Otherwise, chicken is at the bottom of the pecking order in terms of the meats I like. I would say mutton, seafood are right at the top. Only exception is butter chicken. That's my weakness. Otherwise, my best friend and I have a rule: whenever we go out to eat, or whenever we're traveling to another city, we avoid at all costs. We avoid chicken at all costs. So we have to eat other meats, but no chicken, unless we're traveling to, say, Punjab and we want to try butter chicken. That's the only exception. So yeah.
Okay,
I'm through with that.
Obviously, I want to say broiler chicken, but I won't actually, because I actually feel there's a real tragedy with chicken. Because if you look at it, I mean, chicken is actually Indian. Chickens around the world are derived from the red jungle fowl, which is native to India. It's one of the weird things that Indians have never really cared much about chicken, but chickens went from India around the world and developed, and the sort of broiler chicken was developed in the US in the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s, and then came to India. So despite chickens being intrinsic to India, the chicken that we eat today is not really Indian. But as I said, chickens. I mean, there have been analysis of potsherds from the Indus Valley civilization have found that some kind of red jungle fowl was being cooked as way back. So. I mean, I can't really say something so intrinsically Indian. I mean, I will say that the food I find a bit boring is biryani, because everybody else loves biryani and goes on about biryani. But to me, partly perhaps because there's so much bad biryani. To me, while there can be great biryani, biryani has become a very lazy dish. It's become the one solution dish that is cooked, and there are multiple reasons for it. One is because it's easy, I guess, for caterers to cook. There's a whole. It's become a part of our political system. I mean, I don't know if this is true of the north, but in Tamil Nadu, there are political rallies are run on.
Yeah.
There are in Calcutta also. There are these caterers who are really part of the political systems who get contracts, to create vast amounts of biryani. And so it's convenient in that way. But to me, it's often a deeply boring dish because it's often made with the most boring types of rice. Basmati, again, would count to me as now one of the most boring types of rice, simply because it's overused. And we have all these other amazing varieties of rice in India, which should be used. South Indian biryani should never be made with basmati. It should be made with something like jeerika sambal. But these days, it's made with basmati because basmati is seen as prestigious. So to me, biryani is deeply boring, but I'm sure the sweet potato biryani that Sadaf is going to invent for me is going to be amazing.
I'm surely going to try this week. Sweet potato biryani will be on the menu. And I will give you my review of my own food. Awesome. So on that, and I completely agree on the rice part. I think Jeera Kashala is and I was quite surprised every time when I go down south. They're like, why are you using biryani rice? It's just not your rice. Stop using this. Let the north use biryani basmati, and you use the Jeera Kashala, Jeera Kasamba, whatever you call. Awesome. On that nice biryani note, let's end the podcast. Dukaan karte hain band.